to Final Fantasy's creator and longtime director/producer Hironobu Sakaguchi, telling stories has always been a top priority. This guy wants to get you emotionally invested in his game's characters, and he wants to give their stories the best dramatic presentation that current technology will allow. Of course, the technology of the 8-bit era didn't allow for much. When you're developing games for hardware as primitive as the Nintendo Entertainment System, your animation and storytelling tools are gonna be incredibly constrained. Heck, sometimes just creating a configuration of pixels that can be interpreted as a character is an achievement. Still, I think studying the history of Final Fantasy's animation exclusively through the lens of technological advancement would be a mistake, and Final Fantasy II proves why. Sometimes it's all in the presentation. Welcome to the animation of Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy II was released in Japan in 1988, just a year behind the original. We here in North America wouldn't get our hands on it for like 15 years, but right away this game set a precedent for the franchise by not being a direct sequel. All of the core elements are still in there. You got your fantasy quest for magic crystals, turn-based combat, and airships, and hey, there's even a chocobo now. But Final Fantasy II brings an entirely new setting, new characters, and a new story. And from the game's very opening moments, it prioritizes that story in a way the first game never did. Let's compare the opening minutes of these two games, because the difference in narrative approach is night and day. This is going to take a little bit, but I promise it's going to be relevant. Just stick with me. When you pop Final Fantasy I into your console, the first thing you are greeted with is that opening story crawl about the world decaying and your party of 4 young warriors arriving on the scene to save it, as foretold by prophecy. Who are these warriors? Where did they come from? And where did they get these orbs? Who knows? Hey, you decide, it's your party. Final Fantasy II opens with text as well, but this story crawl is not playing around. There's a war going on. Your side is losing. Your party consists of a bunch of kids who just lost their parents and their hometown to an Imperial invasion. They are on the run, and they are being pursued. This intro's not just more specific about who your playable characters are, but much more focused on the immediate dramatic stakes of their situation. After that opening text comes character selection. In Final Fantasy I, this is where you will assemble your team comp and give everybody names. You'll hand out names in Final Fantasy II as well, but this menu doesn't show you job classes, because those aren't a thing this time. Instead, each name selection field is accompanied by a unique portrait, because in this game, you are not naming a party of blank slate warriors. This time, you are giving names to this story's main characters. Now here's where the two games really deviate. In Final Fantasy I, after you've built your team, the game drops you outside of a town and sets you loose. No direction or obvious objectives, just start exploring, fight some random battles. Maybe check out that town and talk to somebody, see if anybody's got a quest or something for you. It's very D&D, right? Here's your setting full of possibilities and problems. Now take those custom characters of yours and go find yourself an adventure. Save that princess, wake up that elf king, and go get that dragon the rat tail it wants for some reason. Whatever, restore the orbs, save the world. Final Fantasy II, meanwhile, is like, no. Hey, don't you remember the text screen? These freshly orphaned kids of yours are fleeing Imperial forces. Guess what? And bam, you immediately get dropped right into an incredibly one-sided battle against Imperial knights. It's the first time Final Fantasy's battle system has been used just to convey narrative information and dramatize a story moment, and you will get cut down almost immediately. The screen goes black, and when you wake up, you're in an unfamiliar place under the watchful eye of the princess who saved you, and one of your 4 player characters is missing. Keep this moment in mind, we are coming back to it later. But that increased focus on narrative continues through the entire experience. No matter where you go exploring in this world, the Empire always feels like this looming, inescapable threat. Your party of kids eventually join this fledgling resistance, and every quest you're given from then on is in some way meant to help strengthen that rebellion effort. You'll sneak back into your occupied hometown to try to help a member of the royal family escape. You'll help to free this other town's enslaved miners and procure a supply of mithril for the resistance so they can be better equipped. You'll attempt to sabotage an Imperial airship, only to fail, and later find that that ship has bombed several towns you previously visited in retaliation. The moment-to-moment play is nearly identical to the first game. You're still exploring dungeons and towns and talking to NPCs and fighting endless random turn-based battles, and yet that larger sense of consistent narrative context helps to lend every step of the adventure higher dramatic stakes. And it's a lot easier to get invested in those stakes because there are actual characters now. Granted, there's still not a whole lot to Firion, Maria, Guy, and Leon, or whatever you choose to name them, but fortunately, Leon vanishing at the beginning means that your party lineup is left with an empty slot, and that opening is filled by a rotating cast of guest characters who all have a bit more going on. You've got Minwoo, Yosef, Layla, Rickard. Heck, Gordon here has a full-blown character arc, starting as this self-loathing coward before slowly coming into his own and taking a leadership role in the rebellion. Now, obviously, later Final Fantasy games are going to be packed with characters who are far more robust than these, but this is a giant leap in the direction of that eventual future, especially considering we are still on the same hardware as the previous game. Which, at long last, brings us to the character animation. With all of this added emphasis on narrative presentation and characters and drama, what has changed in their approach to animation? How many sprites or poses did they have to add per character in order to achieve these results? Well, that's where this gets fun, because the answer is barely any. They barely added anything. Look, here's the full list of sprites for a Final Fantasy I player character. Now, here's the full list of sprites for a Final Fantasy II player character. It's almost exactly the same. 6 poses for locomotion, and now 7 for the combat screen, with the one rather unremarkable new addition being an alternate attack pose for when you're wielding a bow. I guess you could also include the sprites they added to convey status effects, like Frog or Minnie if you wanted, but either way, these are not big additions. Heck, they're barely even noticeable. Now, one change that is significant here is the look of your party's sprites, because now this visual variety is in service of representing different characters rather than different classes. This particular sprite may look very familiar, but in Final Fantasy II, this isn't just what a fighter looks like. This is Firion, and this is Maria, and this is Guy. And they might not have much personality by modern Final Fantasy standards, but each of these sprites now represents a unique person, not just a combat role. But here we are, once again, with a Final Fantasy game where every pose these characters have at their disposal is dedicated to locomotion or combat. Nothing specifically built for emoting or acting performance. And yet, with Final Fantasy II, the developers began to find ways to use this limited collection of assets more creatively. Let's go back to the game's opening minutes, to Firion waking up in that rebel hideout after getting absolutely pummeled by Imperial Knights. This moment is an extremely important landmark in Final Fantasy history because this is Final Fantasy's very first animated story cutscene. In the first game, dialogue had been a completely static affair. You walked up to a character, you pressed A, and a text box popped up containing that NPC's single line of dialogue. Then you pressed A again, the text box went away, and you went about your business. It didn't matter if you were talking to some random nobody in a town or an important character at a major story moment, this is how dialogue was always presented. NPCs all had one text box worth of words, maybe 2. They would only ever speak if you intentionally approached and clicked on them, and when you did, their dialogue was delivered in complete stillness. And you could really feel the dev team straining against the limitations of that original design, like how it required an entire circle of wizards to deliver this exposition dump, or the way they clearly wanted Garland to be able to do this villain monologue before the final battle, but the only way they could make that work was by having him say his first line, as much as he could squeeze into one text box, then warping him back one tile and waiting for you to click on him again so he could say his second line, and then repeating that one more time so he could finish the whole spiel. It was charmingly clunky. But this right here is an actual scene. These two characters, Princess Hilda and her right-hand man, Minwoo, have found your wounded party, brought you to a resistance hideout, and nursed you back to health. The scene begins with the two of them standing on either side of you. Then they both move in to gaze upon your unconscious character and start a dialogue between each other, which had not happened in this franchise till now, with multiple consecutive lines. Then, when they're done talking and decide to leave you to rest, the game walks them to the exit. Minwoo stops at the door, turns back, pauses for a moment, and then leaves. I know it may not seem like much, but that right there was the first animated acting performance in a Final Fantasy game. And they did it without having to add a single new pose for anybody. In theater, there's this concept called blocking. Blocking is a term that describes the actor's movement around the stage during a scene. It's the choreography of the performance in its simplest form. This is something that the play's director works out with the actors during early rehearsals, and it is the foundation level of an actor's performance. Where did they stand on stage and when? That is exactly what we're looking at here. The Final Fantasy team might not have had any unique acting poses to work with, but they could still use the locomotion sprites they already had combined with basic directional movement to block out story scenes. And it's very, very simple, but it does work. Immediately after Hilda and Minwu leave, Firion wakes up, and his sprite flips back and forth a few times. Again, it's a very rudimentary little animation, but the character's action and thoughts do still read. Firion's looking around the room, trying to figure out where he is. Firion says a line, then moves toward the door, looks to the right, yells Leon's name, takes another couple steps, looks left, calls for Maria. He's confused. He doesn't know where his friends are. It's a tiny animated performance achieved entirely with basic stage blocking. And they use this performance blocking approach throughout the game, which not only gives Sakaguchi the ability to tell his story with more clarity, but even enables him to deliver a small emotional punch now and then. When Yosef ends up throwing himself in front of a boulder so the rest of your party can escape, they're able to actually play that scene out visually. You see the boulder, the party runs, the boulder gets closer, then Yosef pops out to stand in front of the boulder's way and tells you to go. It is so crudely presented, but it's just enough to make the tragic moment come through. They can make it an actual story moment when Minwu destroys himself to open a magically sealed door so your party can take the fight to the Emperor. In fact, this scene is the one time they actually did create unique sprite art just for the sake of character performance, allowing Minwu to raise his arms to cast the spell and then fall over dead. Tough break for Minwu, but hey, another first. And they are even able to do a goofy little 8-bit seduction scene, for some reason. With Swan Lake music also, again, for some reason. But moving swiftly on, these story scenes aren't even the only way the Final Fantasy team used existing assets for characterization. NPCs wandering aimlessly around town areas was already a thing in Final Fantasy I, and it was a nice touch. Really helped to make those places feel more lively. But Final Fantasy II improves upon that idea by giving those NPCs variable movement speeds. By just altering the speed at which any given NPC wanders around, they can make that character feel older and tired, or younger and excitable. It's the smallest thing, and again, with zero additional sprite art required, but it does enable an extra dash of personality through contrast. And this early in the series, during the 8-bit era, any example of personality conveyed through animation is a triumph. And your party members get more use out of their walking poses in the battle screen. Now, in addition to stepping forward to attack, your characters also start battles by walking into frame. And they walk off-screen once the battle's over as well, which lends this feeling of forward progress to every random battle. Admittedly, it does come off a little bit weird if one of your party members happens to have been knocked out, because then the rest of the crew just kinda bails on him. Also, your party now retreats from battle by slowly backing off-screen, which is probably the funniest animation in the entire 8-bit era of Final Fantasy. If you're just looking at this game's sprite sheets in isolation, it would be pretty easy to write off the animation of Final Fantasy II as an incremental improvement at best. A little more detail in the sprites here, an additional combat pose there, but all of the clever new ways these limited assets are used results in a huge leap over the animation in its predecessor. We may still not have any character poses dedicated to acting, and we won't for a while yet, but just the addition of basic scene blocking as a tool for building story moments is an incredible breakthrough for the animation in this franchise. This is a fundamental character performance tool that the series is still gonna be using, well, forever. The biggest breakthroughs and leaps forward in game animation aren't always brought about by new technology. Now, better tools and more powerful hardware do raise the ceiling on what a team can create, and we are going to see some very big leaps forward every time this franchise makes the jump to new consoles. But making great game animation is ultimately about working within your constraints to create the best possible result. And in terms of both characterization and story presentation, the animation of Final Fantasy II is a considerably better result. It's a real shame the game isn't very fun. But we are not yet done with the Nintendo Entertainment System, and the Final Fantasy team sure isn't done pushing the limits of this old hardware. So subscribe if you want to see the next video when it drops. And if you're enjoying the series, consider supporting the channel like all of these lovely people. I will see you again soon for the conclusion of the 8-bit era with Final Fantasy III. Until then,